Well, hi, it's Andrew Bell with you. Now, no surprise, so much of our attention right now is on the Middle East. Naturally, there's concern about how long this war will last and how widespread it may ultimately become. That's getting a little clearer now, I think. I think most of us also know that the war will, of course, eventually come to an end, probably sooner than we think. What we're all trying to understand, though, is the impact on the global economy, particularly from the sharp rise in oil prices. What's the big concern, of course, is oil production, refining capacity, and the overall supply. We've been told it could take years to restore production back to pre-war levels. So the long-term issue coming out of this conflict is the cost of the fuel. Almost every product on the planet is linked some way to oil and fuel prices, which means rising costs across the board affects every product. We're already seeing some impact on the Australian housing market in real estate. There's been a slowdown in buyer inquiry and inspections, and that's always a knee-jerk reaction. But that may be relatively short-lived. Once the war ends, the fundamental imbalance between housing supply and demand is still there as it was before the war, and that will continue to underpin the market. The more concerning consequence is the cost of construction of real estate. Building costs are set to rise sharply, and history tells us that once building costs go up, they rarely come back again. We're already seeing the immediate effects. A number of new housing projects and developments have been scrapped. Builders are advising clients they can no longer honour the fixed price contracts that they had in place, and that's forcing developers to either absorb significant cost increases or simply walk away from projects altogether, which some are doing. At the same time, banks are pulling back funding approvals for many developments, concerned that their already thin profit margins have now become way too risky. The result? Fewer properties are being built. So, hold on to your hats. Renovation costs and new housing prices are set to rise significantly, which will push more buyers into the established resale market. Now, this won't play out evenly across the country. Different regions, property types, price points will all respond differently. The one consistent theme, however, is upward pressure on prices. Now that's balanced against the key question: can buyers afford it? That will depend on several factors: interest rates and lending policies of banks, and the broader economic impact of the war, including any potential recession, which is much talked about. A lot of that won't become clear until we see how and when this conflict resolves and how quickly fuel supplies stabilise. But I don't think anyone believes that we'll simply return to how things were before the war. That's finished. As I often say, remember two key points. Firstly, Australia still has significant undersupply of housing. We haven't built enough to keep up with the population growth, and that ongoing shortage actually continues to worsen and therefore supports property values in most markets. Secondly, the Gold Coast fundamentally changed over the past 5 years. It moved from being seen as perhaps one of the highest risk markets in Australia in downturns, and now is seen as one of the safest and strongest parts of the country. A major reason for that is the high proportion of people who've paid cash for their purchases over the last 5 years. Why does that matter? Because in tough times, it's typically high leveraged owners of properties with big mortgages who are forced to sell. That's what creates downward pressure on prices. Markets with more properties owned by people with no debt are far more resilient. There's definitely strategies that anyone considering selling over the next couple of years should be thinking about now. Now, take in mind that the last economic shock was nearly 20 years ago with the global financial crisis, and many agents in today's market, if not most of them, have never experienced conditions produced in those type of economic shocks. Now, I've worked through 6 of these cycles, and that experience that I have becomes incredibly valuable in navigating uncertain markets. So if you're unsure about the right strategy in the current market environment and would like some insight, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm here to help. Well, a big market update this week, but it was a big issue, wasn't it? Now, aren't we lucky to be, and so fortunate to be so far removed from all that instability and wars in the Middle East. I tell you what, we're just so blessed to be where we are. But stay safe, look after one another.